Picture this: you're walking through the ancient, sun-scorched streets of Rhodes, where medieval walls whisper secrets of a time long past. In the shadows of these stone fortifications, an order of warrior monks once operated with such influence and mystery. They made kings tremble and empires take notice. This isn't the story of the Knights Templar, though their legend is well known. This is the tale of their often overlooked but equally powerful rivals, the Knights Hospitaller. A brotherhood that began as healers and caretakers in Jerusalem, only to evolve into one of the most formidable and secretive military orders of the Middle Ages, controlling vast wealth, commanding fleets, and guarding secrets that stretched from the Holy Land to the heart of Europe. What began as a humble mission to aid sick pilgrims transformed into an empire of its own, a network of fortresses, ports, and hidden knowledge that operated with near total autonomy. While the Templars captured the world's imagination, the Knights Hospitaller operated in the background, pulling strings, moving money, and navigating the treacherous waters of medieval politics with a cunning that has often been underestimated. They didn't just survive the fall of the Templars, they thrived, adapting and shifting their power from the Holy Land to Malta, where they continued to defy sultans and shape the destiny of the Mediterranean for centuries. In this video, we're going to uncover the untold story of the Knights Hospitaller. We'll explore how a religious order became a military and economic superpower, investigate the mysteries surrounding their sudden rises and unexpected declines, and piece together the legacy they left behind, one of courage, conspiracy, and whispered secrets that still echo today. This is more than history. It's a journey into the heart of one of the greatest enigmas of the medieval world. So settle in and let's step back into an age of faith, power, and shadows. To truly understand this remarkable transformation, we must travel back to the holy city of Jerusalem in the 11th century, a time of immense religious fervor and perilous journeys. Long before they were knights, they were hospitallers. Around the year 1023, a group of Benedictine monks from the Amalfi Coast in Italy received permission to establish a hostel, a church, and a hospital dedicated to Saint John the Baptist. Their mission was profoundly simple yet radical for its time: to offer care and shelter to all sick and impoverished pilgrims who had made the dangerous trek to the Holy Land. This hospital wasn't just a simple infirmary. By some accounts, it could care for up to 2,000 patients, a staggering feat of medieval charity that operated with a level of compassion that transcended the era's deep religious divides, even treating people of other faiths. This sacred duty of healing formed the very core of their identity, but the world around them was changing violently and irrevocably. In 1099, Christian armies captured Jerusalem in the First Crusade, unleashing a flood of even more pilgrims into a region simmering with tension. The roads to the Holy City became increasingly dangerous, plagued by bandits and hostile forces. The monks who had sworn oaths of peace found themselves on the front lines of a brutal conflict. They began to see pilgrims arriving not just sick from their travels, but wounded, attacked, and robbed. Their mandate to protect the vulnerable collided with a harsh new reality. How could they fulfill their vow to care for the faithful if those faithful were being slaughtered on the paths leading to their hospital's doors? This pressing need for security sparked an inevitable evolution. Slowly, the order began to take on a dual nature. Some brothers would continue their medical and charitable work, while others, often knights who had taken religious vows, would form a protective militia. They became, in essence, monk soldiers, a seeming contradiction that defined the military orders of the age. They were formally recognized as a military order by the Pope in the 12th century, adding the duty of armed defense to their founding mission of medical care. They swore to become a shield for the sick and the poor, defending the routes to salvation with both prayer and the sword. This wasn't an abandonment of their principles, it was an adaptation for survival, a necessary expansion of their holy duty from healing the wounds of war to actively preventing them. Yet this evolution from caregivers to guardians was only the surface of their identity. To truly become a brother, a man had to undergo a profound and secretive transformation, binding himself to the order through a series of solemn and mysterious vows. The initiation rites of the Knights Hospitaller were a gateway into a new life, one of extreme discipline and hidden purpose. While we know the core of their public promises, the full depth of their ceremonies and any esoteric knowledge they guarded remains one of history's enticing puzzles. Publicly, every new member swore the three classic monastic vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, but for a military order, these were not passive pledges. The vow of poverty meant surrendering all personal wealth and property to the common treasury of the order, living a life devoid of personal luxury while the organization itself amassed incredible collective riches. Chastity was a renunciation of family and lineage, ensuring a man's only loyalty was to the order, freeing him to be sent to any battlefield or outpost without earthly ties. And obedience was absolute, a promise to follow the commands of his superiors without question, a crucial element for a disciplined fighting force operating in high-stakes, life-or-death situations. These vows were sworn in a deeply solemn ceremony, often held in a secluded chapel away from prying eyes. The ritual was designed to impress upon the initiate the gravity of the life he was choosing, a life of service, sacrifice, and potential martyrdom. But rumors and fragmentary evidence suggest there may have been layers beyond these public declarations. Some historians point to the order's long history, its exposure to diverse cultures in the Holy Land, and its access to ancient libraries, proposing that they might have possessed a body of secret knowledge. This wasn't necessarily the dramatic treasure maps or holy relics of legend, but rather more practical esoterica, advanced medical techniques learned from both European and Arab physicians, sophisticated codes for communication and financial transactions, or strategic and geopolitical insights gathered from their unique position at the crossroads of the world. This potential for hidden knowledge creates a compelling contrast. On one hand, they were devout Christian brothers, bound by rigid Orthodox vows. On the other, they were a truly international organization, exposed to Islamic science, Eastern mysticism, and Jewish scholarship in a way that was uncommon for the era. It is this duality that fuels speculation about a deeper, more secretive oath, a pledge to protect not just the physical assets of the order, but its intellectual secrets as well. This set them apart, creating a brotherhood that was not just bound by faith and sword, but perhaps also by a shared, guarded understanding of the world that few outside their ranks could ever comprehend. And it was on the island of Rhodes where this potential for hidden knowledge may have reached its absolute peak. After their painful expulsion from the Holy Land following the fall of Acre in 1291, the Knights Hospitaller, now often called the Knights of Rhodes, needed a new home. They found it in this rugged, strategically vital island in the Aegean Sea. Over 2 centuries, they didn't just build a fortress, they constructed an entire independent state, a sovereign entity governed entirely by the order, complete with its own laws, currency, and navy. But perhaps their most significant and enigmatic creation was the Great Archives of Rhodes, a repository of knowledge that was legendary even in its own time. This was no ordinary library. The knights were first and foremost master organizers and administrators. Their entire financial empire, a sprawling network of estates and commanderies across Europe known as the tongues, sent detailed reports, financial records, and strategic intelligence back to Rhodes. The archive would have held meticulous logs of every ship that entered their harbor, every trade agreement, every architectural plan for their formidable fortifications, and detailed dossiers on every political figure from Venice to Constantinople. This alone would have been an intelligence goldmine, a complete picture of Mediterranean power dynamics in the late Middle Ages. But the rumors suggest the collection went far beyond dry administrative records. As travelers, traders, and warriors who constantly interacted with the Arab world, the Byzantine Empire, and the Jewish communities of the East, the knights had unparalleled access to knowledge forbidden or simply unknown in Western Europe. It's highly plausible their archives contained advanced medical texts from Persian and Arabic scholars, detailing surgical procedures and herbal remedies far surpassing European medicine of the era. They likely possessed nautical charts and portolan maps of stunning accuracy, compiled from their own naval expeditions and those of the sailors who paid them tolls, mapping coastlines and sea routes that were state secrets to other powers. The most tantalizing speculation involves what might be termed heretical knowledge. The order's long exposure to Eastern Orthodox Christianity, Islam, and even pre-Christian philosophies could have led them to collect texts that would have been immediately condemned by the Church in Rome. Gnostic Gospels, Neoplatonic philosophical tracts, or Arab alchemical works, all of these could have found a home in their vaults, studied not for heresy but for the practical wisdom or alternative perspectives they might offer. This archive wasn't just a collection of books, it was the intellectual engine of their state, the accumulated wisdom of centuries that allowed a small band of brothers to punch so far above their weight on the world stage. Then, in the summer of 1522, it all came crashing down. The Ottoman Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, determined to remove this thorn from his empire's side, launched an overwhelming invasion with a force of over 100,000 men. The knights under Grand Master Philippe Villiers de l'Isle Adam put up a heroic defense for 6 brutal months, but the outcome was inevitable. The terms of their surrender were surprisingly honorable. Suleiman, in admiration of their courage, allowed the surviving knights to leave Rhodes with their arms, their banners, and their most sacred relics. But what about the archive? The sheer, overwhelming chaos of a military defeat and a mass evacuation makes it almost certain that the vast physical collection of scrolls, ledgers, and codices had to be left behind. The true tragedy is that we don't know what Suleiman's forces did when they entered the palace. Were the archives seen as a priceless treasure and absorbed into the Ottoman libraries in Constantinople? It's possible, though no definitive records have surfaced. More likely, in the frantic looting and destruction that follows any siege, the meticulously kept records of 200 years were simply destroyed. Soldiers more interested in plunder than parchment may have used ancient vellum manuscripts to fuel their cooking fires. Precious maps could have been torn apart, and unique medical texts might have been scattered to the winds, their ink fading under the Rhodes sun. In a matter of days, a knowledge base built over centuries may have been rendered into ash and lost forever. The void left by this loss is immense. We can only speculate on the historical mysteries that could have been solved. Those detailed shipping logs could have rewritten the economic history of the Mediterranean. The intelligence reports might have revealed unknown alliances and betrayals that shaped the era's wars. And those hypothetical heretical texts, their loss means we may never know the full extent of the cross-cultural intellectual exchange that was happening in the shadows, away from the dogmatic eyes of the Church. The fall of Rhodes wasn't just a military defeat, it was a cataclysmic event for history itself, silencing a unique voice that had witnessed and recorded the complexities of its age from a perspective like no other. Cast out and homeless after their defeat at Rhodes, the knights drifted for years, a sovereign order without a nation. Then, in 1530, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V made them an offer they couldn't refuse, the barren, rocky archipelago of Malta. It was a strategic masterstroke for the emperor, placing a dedicated Christian garrison directly astride the main Ottoman shipping lanes between Constantinople and North Africa. For the knights, it was a stark downgrade from the lush gardens and formidable defenses of Rhodes, but it was a home. They accepted, becoming the Knights of Malta, and immediately began the immense task of fortifying their new, unforgiving base. For decades, they prepared, knowing the Ottoman gaze would inevitably turn their way again. That moment arrived in the spring of 1565, Sultan Suleiman, now an old man, was determined to finish what he had started over 40 years earlier. He assembled an armada of nearly 200 ships and an invasion force of at least 40,000 elite troops, including the feared Janissaries. Their goal was the complete and utter eradication of the Order of St. John. To oppose them, Grand Master Jean Parisot de Valette, a 70-year-old veteran who had been a slave on an Ottoman galley in his youth, could muster roughly 9,000 men, only 500 of whom were full knights and sergeants at arms. The rest were local Maltese militia and a contingent of Spanish and Italian soldiers. The math was simple, and it spelled certain annihilation. What followed was not just a battle, but a 4-month-long spectacle of sheer, unadulterated human endurance, a masterclass in defensive warfare that would become the stuff of legend. The Ottoman plan was logical: neutralize the primary fortresses. They first landed a large force on the strategic high ground of Singlia, but the knights, anticipating the move, had built a massive, submerged stockade of sharpened stakes across the entrance to the creek, shredding the Ottoman boats and turning the water red. The Turks then turned their full fury on Fort St. Elmo, a small star-shaped outpost guarding the harbor's entrance. For 36 days, under a constant hail of cannon fire, the tiny garrison held on. The fort became a meat grinder. The Ottomans lost thousands of men taking it, including one of their greatest generals. The knights lost the fort, but their stubborn defense had bought Valette the most precious commodity of all: time. It had bled the Ottoman army, shattered its morale, and crucially delayed the main assault on the stronger defenses of Singlia and Burgu. This is where the legend of Grand Master Valette's leadership truly took root. He was everywhere at once. In his 70s, he slept in his armor, a plate of food often going cold beside him as he directed reinforcements to crumbling walls. In one of the siege's most iconic moments, when a breach was opened at Singlia and Ottoman flags were planted on the ramparts, Valette himself, sword in hand, led the countercharge, personally driving the invaders back into the sea. His genius was psychological as much as it was tactical. He understood that this was a war of wills. After the fall of St. Elmo, the Ottoman commander had the bodies of several knights decapitated, lashed to crosses, and floated across the harbor as a grisly message. Valette's response was chillingly brilliant. He immediately had all his Ottoman prisoners executed, fired their heads from cannons back into the Turkish lines, and declared there would be no quarter given. This act of brutal reciprocity erased any notion of surrender from his men's minds and signaled to the Ottomans that they were facing an enemy that would fight to the last breath. Yet, for all this military ingenuity, many chroniclers of the time insisted that something more, something supernatural, was at work. Stories of divine intervention began to circulate almost immediately. There were widespread accounts among the Ottoman troops of a lady in white seen walking the ramparts of Burgu, inspiring terror in their ranks. An apparition many faithful believed was the Virgin Mary herself protecting her warriors. More curiously, there were reports of Chinese letter, and most crucial relief force from Sicily, which seemed to arrive at the exact moment the knight's strength was utterly spent. They appeared not a week too early or a day too late, but at the precise hour of maximum desperation, a timing so perfect it felt orchestrated by a higher power. The exhausted defenders, seeing the Christian banners on the horizon, found a final reservoir of strength to fight on, while the Ottomans, exhausted, plague-ridden, and now facing fresh troops, lost all heart. So, how do we explain this impossible victory? The answer lies not in choosing between military genius and divine intervention, but in understanding how they intertwined. Valette's strategic use of the landscape, his unbreakable fortifications, his psychological warfare, and his unparalleled example of personal courage created the conditions for a miracle. He maximized every single advantage, no matter how small. The knights and the Maltese people fought with a ferocity born from the certainty that defeat meant total extermination. The miraculous timing of the Sicilian relief force was likely the result of long-planned communications and a favorable wind, but to those who lived through the hell of that summer, it felt like salvation sent from heaven. The Great Siege of Malta was a victory forged in the meeting point of human determination and historical circumstance, a moment where preparation, leadership, and perhaps a touch of the inexplicable combined to change the course of history. Yet this staggering material wealth, these castles and coins and galleys, was only the most visible layer of their power. The true, hidden treasury of the Knights Hospitaller was far more complex and potentially far more valuable, a collection of assets that blurred the line between the spiritual and the strategic. They were, after all, a religious order first, and their spiritual capital was immense. For centuries, they were the recipients of some of Christendom's most sacred and sought-after relics, objects of veneration that drew pilgrims, patronage, and divine prestige. Chief among these was their deep connection to their patron saint, John the Baptist. The order's very first hospital in Jerusalem was built on the site of a monastery traditionally dedicated to him, and they fiercely cultivated the belief that they possessed the saint's most revered relic, his head. While several churches across Europe made the same claim, the Knights' assertion carried significant weight due to their origins in the Holy Land. The possession of such an object wasn't merely a point of religious pride, it was a powerful political tool. To own the skull of the Baptist was to hold a direct, tangible link to the very foundation of Christianity, a symbol that legitimized their divine mission and attracted devout donors from every corner of Europe. Alongside this, they were also rumored to safeguard fragments of the true cross, the crown of thorns, and the arm of St. George, assembling a spiritual arsenal that made their chapels some of the most hallowed ground in the medieval world. But we must look beyond the gold and the bones to glimpse their most enigmatic treasure. If their material wealth was the body of the order and their relics were its soul, then their knowledge was its mind, a vast, sophisticated, and largely lost intellectual fortune. This was not wealth that could be minted into coins or locked in a chest. It was stored in ledgers, maps, and memories. As we touched on with the archives of Rhodes, their true hidden treasury was information. They operated the medieval equivalent of a global intelligence network. Each commandery across Europe was a node, collecting local political gossip, economic data, and military news, which was then funneled back to the central leadership. Think of the value of that data. They would have known about harvest failures in France months before the king did, allowing them to manipulate grain prices. They possessed detailed charts of Mediterranean currents and hidden coves, knowledge that made their navy unbeatable and their piracy incredibly efficient. Their hospital, the core of their original mission, was a repository of advanced medical knowledge. Through their contacts in the Arab world, their doctors likely practiced techniques like anesthesia and sterilization that were centuries ahead of European medicine, secrets that could mean the difference between life and death for a wounded knight or a powerful patron. This knowledge granted them influence that far exceeded their military strength. They were the keepers of secrets that popes and emperors needed. So, what became of this non-material treasury? The fate of the physical relics is debated and lost to plunder and time, but the fate of their knowledge is the greater tragedy. The vast majority of it, particularly the administrative and strategic intelligence, was almost certainly designed to be ephemeral, updated, used, and discarded. It lived in the minds of their admirals, their treasurers, and their diplomats. When the order was finally expelled from Malta by Napoleon in 1798, this living library was scattered to the winds. The knights dispersed across Europe, and their centuries of accumulated savvy, their secret routes, their contacts, and their understanding of power dissolved into history. The real treasure of the Knights Hospitaller was never a chest of gold. It was a way of thinking, a system of operation so effective it allowed a small band of brothers to stand against empires. And that is a treasure truly lost to time. Amidst the tales of military glory and sacred relics, there exists another legend of the Knights of Malta, one that shimmers with the allure of gold and the darkness of a curse, the story of the Maltese falcon. This was not a mere statue. According to the lore, it was a masterpiece of medieval artistry, a life-sized bird of prey sculpted from solid gold, encrusted with priceless rubies, emeralds, and sapphires, with eyes carved from a single enormous black diamond. Its purported purpose was one of profound gratitude. In 1530, the same year the knights took possession of their rocky new home, the story claims they commissioned this fabulous object as a tribute to their benefactor, Emperor Charles V, a tangible thank you for the gift of Malta. The legend continues that the meticulously crafted falcon was loaded onto a galley, a ship whose sails were filled with the hope of securing the emperor's continued favor. But the Mediterranean, then as now, was a treacherous and unpredictable sea. A violent storm is said to have risen, or perhaps the ship fell prey to the pirates who infested those waters. The result was the same. The ship, its crew, and its priceless golden cargo were lost to the depths, vanishing without a trace. It's a compelling narrative, a classic tragedy of immense wealth and potential sunk beneath the waves, leaving behind only a ghost story and a tantalizing question: was any of it real? Historians sharply divide on the answer, and the evidence leans heavily toward myth. There is no mention of such an extravagant gift in the extensive financial records of the order, which were famously meticulous. The cost of creating such an object would have been astronomical, a severe drain on an order that was, at that precise moment, pouring every spare resource into fortifying the barren island of Malta against the inevitable Ottoman attack. It seems an almost frivolous expense for a brotherhood facing existential threats. Furthermore, no correspondence from Charles V's court ever mentions the expectation or the loss of such a gift. For an object of such supposed magnificence, its historical footprint is eerily silent, suggesting it was a fireside tale that grew grander with each telling, a symbolic story perhaps meant to represent the immense debt the knights felt rather than a physical artifact they actually sent. Yet, from the seeds of this historical rumor, a towering oak of fiction grew. The legend was immortalized in 1929 by author Dashiell Hammett in his seminal hard-boiled detective novel, The Maltese Falcon. In Hammett's story, the falcon transforms from a tribute into a beseeching gift given to appease the emperor for past debts. The novel's plot revolves around a seedy collection of treasure hunters, liars, and manipulators, all desperately chasing the elusive statuette which they believe has been recovered. The 1941 film adaptation, starring Humphrey Bogart as the cynical private eye Sam Spade, cemented the iconography of the stuff that dreams are made of into popular culture. The black bird became the ultimate MacGuffin, an object of desire whose true value is not in its composition but in the greed and corruption it reveals in everyone who seeks it. The fascinating twist is how the fictional narrative borrowed from and then reinforced the historical myth. Hammett's version took a vague Knights of Malta legend and gave it a specific, darkly glamorous form, creating a feedback loop where many people now assume the story must be true because they've seen the movie. The real historical mystery of the Knights Hospitaller, a blend of verified fact, half-remembered rumor, and outright legend, provided the perfect fertile ground for a noir masterpiece. The Order's aura of secret wealth, hidden knowledge, and a history lost to time offered a credible backdrop for a tale about the futile and often deadly pursuit of a dream. So, while a solid gold falcon almost certainly never rested in a treasure vault on Malta, its legend accomplished something perhaps more lasting. It transformed the Knights' enigmatic history into a permanent fixture of our collective imagination, a curse of desire that continues to captivate us. Their dominion was not confined to the land and its fortresses. It extended across the waves where their true power was both visible and shrouded in mystery. To control the Mediterranean was to control the destiny of empires, and the Knights Hospitaller built a navy that became the stuff of legend and nightmare. These were not the vast, sluggish ships of line that would dominate later centuries. The knights relied on the galley, a sleek, deadly predator powered by both oar and sail, designed for speed, agility, and terrifying close-quarters combat. Their fleet was the sharp, mobile claw of the order, able to strike with impunity and vanish into the endless blue horizon. The lifeblood of this naval force was a unique and fearsome combination of sanctioned privateering and outright piracy, a practice known as the corso. With a formal letter of marque from the Grand Master, a knight captain was granted the legal and spiritual authority to hunt the shipping of the Ottoman Empire and its allies. For these men, it was a holy war on the high seas, a continuation of their crusading vow by other means. A successful voyage was a triple victory. It damaged the economic and military capacity of Islam. It liberated Christian slaves who often manned the enemy's oars, and it brought immense wealth back to Malta in the form of captured ships, cargoes of silk and spice, and ransoms for important prisoners. This constant, aggressive harassment made the sea lanes between Constantinople and Alexandria a perpetual danger zone for Ottoman merchants, a thorn in the side of the Sultan that never ceased to bleed. But the true secret to their naval supremacy likely wasn't just courage or divine favor. It was an unmatched command of information and geography. The effectiveness of their galleys was magnified by a network of hidden coves, secret watering holes, and secluded islands scattered across the Mediterranean. These were not random anchorages, they were carefully charted and jealously guarded operational secrets. A knight captain, pursuing a fat merchantman, could lead his prey into what looked like open water, only to dart into a narrow, hidden inlet unknown to any official chart. His larger Ottoman pursuer would be forced to break off the chase, baffled by the disappearing act. From these hidden bases, the fleet could launch ambushes with stunning coordination, seeming to materialize from the very coastline itself. This mastery of the sea also gave rise to one of the Order's most enduring mysteries, the legend of their ghost fleet, ships and treasures lost to the deep without a trace. We know of specific, documented losses, like the sinking of the 70-gun ship the Santa Ana in a violent storm in 1734, taking a fortune in silver coinage down with it. But it is the undocumented, whispered about losses that truly capture the imagination. Were there specialized vessels, perhaps modified for speed or stealth, whose designs were lost when they sank in some forgotten squall? What about the countless smaller corsair vessels that set out from Malta, heavy with ambition and the hope of plunder, only to vanish into a sudden mist, their fates and any secrets they carried erased by the sea? The most tantalizing question revolves around the fate of the San Giovanni, the flagship of the fleet for much of the 17th century. After a long and storied career, it simply disappears from the naval registers. There is no record of it being broken up for scrap, no account of its glorious demise in battle. It just vanished. Some maritime historians speculate it may have been lost with all hands in a catastrophic storm, its wreckage settling in some deep, uncharted trench, perhaps still holding the personal effects of a grand admiral or unique logs detailing secret negotiations or hidden routes. Others suggest it could have been scuttled intentionally in a time of peace to protect its advanced design from falling into rival hands. The Mediterranean floor is a vast museum of lost history, and the knights, with their culture of secrecy, undoubtedly left behind sunken enigmas we may never solve. Their greatest naval technology may not have been a specific weapon, but a system, a web of hidden knowledge, covert bases, and relentless aggression that made them the ghosts of the sea, felt by all but truly known by none. Yet the shadow of the Templars' abrupt and brutal dissolution in 1314 inevitably falls across the Hospitaller's own history, raising one of the most compelling and persistent mysteries of the medieval world. What was the true relationship between these two mighty orders? Were they bitter rivals, as often portrayed, locked in a struggle for influence and papal favor? Or was there a deeper, hidden alliance, a secret sympathy between two groups who understood the immense burden and unique perspective that came with being both monk and warrior? The official records show competition, sometimes fierce, over land, donations, and strategic influence in the Holy Land. But the unofficial story, whispered through the centuries, suggests something far more intriguing happening beneath the surface. The most tantalizing theory proposes that the Knights Hospitaller, witnessing the shocking betrayal and destruction of their rivals, acted not with gleeful opportunism but with quiet solidarity. Could they have secretly offered sanctuary to fleeing Templars in the chaotic aftermath of the Purge? The logistics are certainly plausible. The Hospitallers possessed a vast, Europe-wide network of commanderies, remote monasteries, and fortified preceptories, a perfect underground railroad for men who are now the most hunted individuals in Christendom. A Templar knight, stripping off his distinctive white mantle with its red cross, could have been absorbed into the ranks of the Hospitallers, his martial skills and administrative experience welcomed, his true past known only to a trusted few within the inner circle of the order. This would not have been a mass migration, but a careful, covert operation to save at least a core of knowledge and manpower from the king's and pope's wrath. This leads to the even more provocative question of inheritance. The Templars were legendary not just for their military prowess, but for their rumored immense wealth and their possession of mysterious relics, from the Holy Grail to the head of the idol Baphomet. When their order was dissolved, a vast amount of their declared assets was officially transferred by papal decree to the Knights Hospitaller. But did they receive it all, or did the most sensitive treasures, the esoteric texts, the unusual relics, the truly secret wealth vanish before the king's officials could inventory it? It is a compelling idea that the Hospitallers, as the only organization capable of understanding and protecting such dangerous secrets, became the silent guardians of the Templars' most controversial legacy. They wouldn't have flaunted it, they would have locked it away deep within their own archives, another layer of mystery added to their already formidable hidden treasury. This speculation extends beyond the Templars to an even more heterodox group, the Cathars of southern France. The Cathars, or Albigensians, held beliefs the Church deemed dangerously heretical, including a dualistic view of the material world as inherently evil. They were brutally exterminated in the Albigensian Crusade a century before the Templars' fall. Yet, some theories suggest a thread of connection. The geographic and temporal overlap is curious. The Hospitallers held significant properties in the Languedoc region, the heartland of Catharism, and were notably less enthusiastic in their participation in the crusade against them than other military orders. Their core mission of healing and care could have fostered a pragmatic, even sympathetic, contact with the persecuted Cathar perfecti, who are also known for their asceticism and charitable works. While no solid evidence exists of a direct doctrinal exchange, the possibility of a cultural or intellectual osmosis is fascinating. The Cathars' radical rejection of materialism and their emphasis on personal spiritual purity could have resonated with the more introspective members of the Hospitaller Brotherhood. Could some Cathar ideas about the nature of the soul or their distinct methods of peaceful resistance have filtered into the order's more private teachings? It seems unlikely they adopted outright heresy, but they may have absorbed a certain tolerance for unorthodox thought, a willingness to look beyond rigid church doctrine that would later serve them well in their dealings with the diverse cultures of the Mediterranean. The survival of any Cathar traditions would have been a secret buried deeper than any Templar gold, a spiritual inheritance guarded in utter silence. The true nature of these connections remains one of history's great unanswered questions, a shadowy web of what-ifs that continues to fuel the enduring mystique of the Knights Hospitaller. Beyond the clash of steel and the prayers in their chapels, another, more subtle pursuit was rumored to occupy the most learned minds within the Knights Hospitaller, the ancient and enigmatic art of alchemy. This was far more than a medieval version of get-rich-quick scheming. It was a profound philosophical and spiritual endeavor that sought to understand the very fabric of creation. With their unparalleled access to texts from Arab scholars, Byzantine mystics, and Jewish Kabbalists, the Order's great libraries were a potential treasure trove of alchemical knowledge. It is not difficult to imagine a senior knight, also a trained physician, poring over a fragile manuscript in a lamplit scriptorium, not just seeking a formula for gold, but searching for the key to spiritual and physical perfection itself. The ultimate goal of this quest was the Philosopher's Stone, a legendary substance believed to possess two miraculous properties: the ability to transmute base metals like lead into pure gold, and to produce the elixir of life, a potion granting immortality or at least greatly prolonged youth and health. For an order whose original mission was healing the sick and whose later duty was financially supporting a perpetual war, both applications would have been irresistibly compelling. The ability to generate limitless wealth would have bankrolled their fleets and fortifications indefinitely, freeing them from reliance on European donors. Even more powerfully, the discovery of a universal medicine would have been the ultimate fulfillment of their founding oath, allowing them to not just treat illness but to conquer death itself. We do have compelling, tangible evidence that they engaged in what we would now call early chemistry and metallurgy. On Malta, archaeological findings point to the existence of sophisticated laboratories, particularly within the Sacra Infermeria, their renowned hospital. These were not dark, smoky dungeons filled with mystical symbols, but advanced workshops for their time. Furnaces, alembics for distillation, and mortars for grinding ingredients would have been standard equipment. Here, brothers trained as apothecaries would have distilled medicinal waters, purified salts, and created complex herbal tinctures and ointments to treat everything from battle wounds to the plague. The line between practical medicine and alchemical inquiry was incredibly blurry. The process of distilling the quintessence from a plant to capture its purest healing power was, in methodology and spirit, a deeply alchemical act. One figure often cited in connection to the Order's esoteric pursuits is the enigmatic Count Alessandro di Cagliostro, an 18th-century mystic and adventurer. While he was never a knight himself, he was initiated into a Maltese Masonic lodge that had strong historical ties to the Order of St. John. Cagliostro famously claimed to possess the secrets of the Egyptian rite of Freemasonry and to have discovered the elixir of life. His alleged connections to the hidden traditions of Malta have fueled speculation that he was an inheritor of, or a storyteller drawing upon, lost alchemical knowledge from the knight's heyday. Whether he was a genuine adept or a brilliant charlatan, his story is wrapped up in the same aura of secret knowledge that surrounded the Order itself. But we must ask, were their alchemical pursuits ultimately a success? In the literal sense, no one ever produced a verifiable lump of the Philosopher's Stone. Yet, if we view alchemy not as a failed proto-chemistry but as a system of spiritual refinement, their success becomes far more apparent. The entire structure of the Order was a form of human alchemy. They took men often young, noble-born knights motivated by faith, ambition, or a thirst for adventure, and subjected them to a rigorous process of transformation. Through strict discipline, vows of poverty and obedience, and the constant tempering of battle, they sought to transmute the base metal of a worldly soldier into the spiritual gold of a selfless, purified warrior monk. The real elixir of life may not have been a liquid in a flask, but the enduring legacy they forged, a name that has lived on for 1,000 years, outlasting empires and sparking imaginations long after their last galley set sail. Standing on the bastions of Valletta today, you are surrounded by a landscape of stone that whispers not just of war, but of a deeper, more cryptic language. After their miraculous victory in the Great Siege, the Knights Hospitaller transformed the island of Malta into one of the most formidable fortified complexes the world had ever seen. But a closer look reveals that these were not merely walls designed to stop cannonballs. They were a complex tapestry of stone, woven with symbols that suggest a world of meaning far beyond simple military defense. To walk through the fortified city of Valletta or the mighty Fort St. Angelo is to step into a three-dimensional puzzle, a stone book waiting to be read. The most immediate and obvious layer of this puzzle is the sheer, awe-inspiring genius of the military architecture itself. The renowned Italian engineer Francesco Laparelli, commissioned by Grand Master Jean de Valette himself, designed Valletta from the ground up as a masterpiece of defensive theory. The city's grid-like streets were not just for order, they allowed for the rapid movement of troops to any point under attack. The bastions are angled perfectly to eliminate any blind spots, ensuring that every inch of ground before the walls was swept by overlapping fields of fire from cannons and muskets. The walls themselves are not vertical cliffs of stone. They are massive, sloping glacis designed to deflect incoming cannonballs upward and away, causing them to harmlessly ricochet into the sky. Every curve, every angle was a calculated response to the evolving technology of warfare, a physical manifestation of strategic brilliance honed over centuries of conflict. Yet, carved into this canvas of pure function, one finds a proliferation of intricate symbols that seem to serve no martial purpose. Heraldic coats of arms adorn gateways and chapels as expected, proudly displaying the lineages of the Grand Masters who ruled. But alongside them are more enigmatic markings. Look closely at the stonework around certain doorways or on key bastions, and you might find meticulously carved maritime compass roses, their points tracing not just the cardinal directions but more esoteric alignments. There are strange geometric patterns interlocking circles, labyrinth-like designs, and variations on the Vesica Piscis, an ancient symbol formed by the intersection of two circles. Most pervasive of all is the eight-pointed cross, the Maltese cross itself. While it is the symbol of the order, its 8 points are said to represent the 8 langs or tongues of the knights. But in broader esoteric tradition, the number 8 symbolizes regeneration, infinity, and the balance between the material and spiritual worlds. Its constant repetition on the fortifications feels less like simple branding and more like a continuous, silent invocation of divine protection and eternal strength. This symbolism extends into the very layout of the city, suggesting a layer of sacred geometry. Some historians and researchers have proposed that the placement of Valletta's most important buildings, the St. John's Co-Cathedral, the Grand Master's Palace, the main auberges of the Langs, may form alignments that correspond to specific stars or significant liturgical dates. The cathedral itself, though lavish inside, has a surprisingly plain facade, leading some to speculate that its true significance was internal and spiritual, a hidden jewel within a hardened shell. The possibility exists that the knights, steeped in a tradition that saw no conflict between faith, science, and warfare, designed their capital not just as a fortress for the body, but as a sanctuary for the soul, aligning its energies with the heavens themselves. Then there are the legends of the hidden passages, the rumors that the solid rock beneath Valletta and Fort St. Angelo is riddled with tunnels known only to the Order. Some of these are confirmed, strategic sally ports for troops to launch surprise counterattacks and secure storerooms carved deep into the bedrock, but others are shrouded in mystery. Persistent tales speak of a secret, submerged tunnel connecting Fort St. Angelo on one side of the Grand Harbor to the fortifications on the other, an impossible-seeming feat of engineering that would have allowed for the covert movement of men and supplies even under a complete naval blockade. Another story tells of a hidden chamber within the fort, a sealed room containing archives or treasures deemed too sensitive to be kept elsewhere, its entrance deliberately lost or concealed behind masonry. While no solid evidence for these specific tales has been found, they persist because they fit the character of the knights, a brotherhood that always operated with multiple layers of secrecy, always holding one final card close to its chest. So, what are we to make of all this? Were the knights incorporating covert messages or mystical protections into their strongest holds? The most likely explanation is a synthesis of the practical and the profound. The symbols could have served multiple overlapping purposes. A compass rose might honor their maritime power while also secretly marking a true north alignment for esoteric rituals. A geometric pattern above a door could be both a beautiful flourish and a coded sign to initiated brothers, pointing the way to a secure meeting chamber. The fortifications were their ultimate redoubt, the final expression of their identity. It seems only natural that they would imbue every stone not only with the science of defense, but with the symbols of everything they fought to protect, their faith, their knowledge, and their mysterious, enduring brotherhood. The walls were their shield, but the symbols may have been their soul. Even the most formidable fortresses can be breached from within, and perhaps no story better illustrates the dark undercurrents of internal politics within the Knights Hospitaller than the bizarre and shrouded fate of Grand Master Fawkes de Villeret. His tumultuous leadership began with one of the Order's greatest military triumphs, the conquest of the island of Rhodes, a feat that should have cemented his legacy as one of their most celebrated heroes. Yet, just a few short years later, he found himself besieged not by Ottoman armies, but by his own brothers, in a violent coup that speaks volumes about the brutal realities of power within the Order. After the glorious capture of Rhodes in 1309, de Villeret's rule grew increasingly authoritarian and by many accounts decadent. Chroniclers of the time describe a leader who began to isolate himself, surrounding himself with a small coterie of favorites and ignoring the counsel of the senior knights who represented the different langs or regional divisions of the Order. He was accused of fiscal mismanagement, of squandering the Order's treasure on personal luxuries, and perhaps most damningly, of neglecting the very defense and governance of the new island kingdom he had fought so hard to win. The simmering discontent among the rank-and-file knights finally boiled over in 1317. In a stunning act of rebellion, a faction of brothers stormed the palace in Rhodes, trapping de Villeret inside and laying siege to his own headquarters. After a violent standoff, the Grand Master was forced to surrender and was formally deposed by the Order's General Chapter, a humiliating fall from grace for the man who had given them their home. But the mystery of Fawkes de Villeret does not end with his deposition. It only deepens from there. The official historical record presents a confusing and contradictory set of endings for the disgraced leader. One account suggests he was offered a face-saving retirement, granted a generous pension and the commandery of the wealthy province of Languedoc in southern France, where he lived out his days in comfortable exile. Another, more dramatic version claims that after a period of penance and reflection, he was actually mysteriously reinstated for a brief period as co-Grand Master alongside his successor, Hélène de Villeneuve, an almost unheard of political compromise that hints at a power struggle too complex for the records to fully capture. Then there is the darkest and most persistent theory that his deposition was never meant to be peaceful and that he was assassinated by his rivals to prevent any chance of a return to power. In the cutthroat world of medieval power politics, allowing a former leader with a loyal faction to live in exile was a constant risk. His sudden disappearance from the forefront of history could easily be read as evidence of a silent, final solution to an internal threat. The truth is, we simply do not know. The Order, so meticulous in its record-keeping for financial and military matters, was notoriously opaque when it came to its deepest shames and internal scandals. The conflicting stories of de Villeret's fate are like competing smokescreens, each designed to hide a different truth, whether it was the Order's embarrassment at its own internal violence, the need to maintain a unified public image, or the grim reality of a murder covered up. This episode is far more than a simple historical curiosity. it is a window into the immense pressures and factions that defined the order's leadership. The role of Grand Master was one of near absolute power, but it was a power constantly balanced on a knife's edge. He had to be a spiritual leader, a military strategist, a financial manager, and a cunning politician all at once, answering to a fractious assembly of proud knights from across Europe, each with their own regional agendas and powerful aristocratic backers. The coup against de Villars serves as a stark reminder that the greatest threat to the Knights Hospitaller did not always come from the Ottoman Sultan or rival empires. Sometimes the most dangerous enemies were the ones wearing the same 8-pointed cross, men who believed that the survival and purity of their sacred brotherhood justified the most extreme and ruthless measures against anyone who threatened it, even if that person was their own chosen leader. Yet for all their genuine historical intrigue, the Knights Hospitaller have found themselves improbably entangled in one of the most successful works of modern fiction, dragged into a web of conspiracy that connects them to a secret lineage of Christ himself. This story begins not in the Middle Ages but in the 20th century with the rise of the Priory of Sion mythos. The tale goes that in 1099, a secret society called the Priory of Sion was founded to protect a breathtaking secret, that Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene were married and had a bloodline that continued through European royalty. This society, the theory claims, was the true power behind the Knights Templar and later the Knights Hospitaller, guiding their actions for centuries. The entire foundation for this narrative, however, was an elaborate and admitted hoax. In the 1950s, a Frenchman named Pierre Plantard and his associates created a fictitious history for a small social club they had named the Priory of Sion. They deposited expertly forged documents in the French National Library, including fabricated lists of Grand Masters of the Priory, a roster that included such luminous names as Leonardo da Vinci, Isaac Newton, and Victor Hugo. Their goal was not to rewrite history for the world, but to bolster Plantard's own claim to a non-existent French throne by positioning himself as a supposed descendant of that holy lineage. The fabrications were painstakingly detailed, creating an air of authenticity that would later seduce countless researchers. This fabricated history was then popularized and given a veneer of academic credibility by the 1982 book The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail. The authors Michael Bagent, Richard Lee, and Henry Lincoln took Plantard's hoax at face value and wove it into a sweeping alternative history of Europe. In their narrative, the Knights Templar were created by the Priory of Sion to unearth and protect documents proving the existence of the Merovingian bloodline, the supposed descendants of Jesus. When the Templars were destroyed, the story goes, their secret mission and their most sensitive treasures were inherited by their fellow military order, the Knights Hospitaller, who became the new guardians of the explosive truth. This conspiracy theory reached its zenith of global popularity with Dan Brown's 2003 record-shattering novel, The Da Vinci Code. Brown expertly repackaged the core premise of the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail into a fast-paced thriller. In his book, The Priory of Sion is real, and its secrets are so dangerous that a secret faction within the Catholic Church, Opus Dei, will kill to suppress them. While the Hospitallers themselves are not major players in Brown's plot, their historical connection to the Templars and their reputation for secrecy made them a logical piece of the puzzle for many readers trying to connect the dots of the fictional mystery. The novel's immense success embedded this fictional connection between these orders and the Christ bloodline myth deep into popular culture, blurring the lines between fact and fantasy for millions. So why were the Hospitallers such a perfect fit for this kind of speculative fiction? The answer lies in their authentic, documented history, which is stranger than any conspiracy. They were indeed a secretive, wealthy, and powerful international organization that operated with a degree of independence that seems almost unbelievable today. They answered primarily to the Pope, making them a state within states, a network that transcended national borders. Their dual nature as both monks and warriors creates a natural tension that begs for a deeper, hidden purpose. And their survival long after the fall of the Templars positions them as the logical inheritors of any lost secrets. When real history provides such a fertile ground of mystery, it becomes easy to graft fictional vines onto very solid, very real trees. Ultimately, the Priory of Sion saga reveals more about our own modern desires than it does about the medieval past. We live in an age hungry for hidden truths and alternative narratives, where a simple, complex history can feel less satisfying than a grand, secret plot. The real Knights Hospitaller, with their bloody battles, financial genius, and political maneuvering, are fascinating enough. But the myth of a hidden bloodline offers a different kind of allure, a romantic, spiritual quest that connects the mundane present to a sacred, secret past. The Hospitaller's true legacy is one of resilience and adaptability, but the conspiracy theories ensure they will forever be remembered for a secret they never kept, guarding a treasure that never existed. Beneath the sun-drenched battlements and within the hallowed silence of their chapels, the Knights Hospitaller maintained a final, solemn duty to their own, the sacred act of burial. For a brotherhood so defined by their service in life, their funerary practices and resting places offer a profound and often overlooked glimpse into their inner world, a world where martial pride, deep faith, and lingering mysteries were carved into stone for eternity. Their journey as guardians of the dead began in the very heart of Jerusalem, in the crypt of their original church, a place that would set the tone for centuries of tradition. In that first hospice, death was not a stranger but a constant companion. The monks, dedicated to caring for the sick, would have also provided a Christian burial for pilgrims who succumbed to their illnesses far from home. Their original crypt was likely a simple, somber space, a reflection of their early humility. But as they evolved into a powerful military order, their approach to mortality transformed as well. Death in battle, martyrdom for the faith, became the highest aspiration for a knight. His tomb was not just a place of rest, it was a testament to his sacrifice and a promise of eternal reward. This belief fueled the creation of increasingly elaborate burial sites, each designed to honor the individual while glorifying the eternal brotherhood he served. The ultimate expression of this funerary grandeur is found in Malta, within the stunning St. John's Co-Cathedral in Valletta. To step inside is to walk upon a vast tapestry of the dead. The entire floor is composed of intricately inlaid marble tombstones, each one a unique masterpiece commemorating a knight of high rank. These are not simple markers, they are vibrant heraldic canvases, bursting with colorful coats of arms, symbolic imagery, and Latin epitaphs that recount tales of valor, virtue, and noble lineage. Skulls and skeletons dance with angels and victory laurels, a stark and beautiful reminder of the Order's core philosophy, the inseparable link between a life of martial service and the certainty of divine judgment. But these visible tombs are only part of the story. The cathedral and older sites like the Fort St. Angelo Chapel are rumored to conceal far more secretive burials. The most tantalizing mystery surrounds the final resting place of the Order's greatest hero, Grand Master Jean de Valette. After his legendary defense during the Great Siege, he was given the unprecedented honor of being buried within the crypt of the original conventual church of St. John, a site now lost beneath the cathedral's later expansions. While a magnificent monument commemorates him, the exact location of his physical remains is unknown. Some speculate he was interred in a sealed, hidden chamber beneath the main altar, a secret known only to his successors to protect his grave from desecration by future enemies. Other Grand Masters, particularly those who died under controversial or politically sensitive circumstances, may have also been granted similarly discreet tombs, their locations obscured to prevent their graves from becoming focal points for dissent or discord within the Order. The effigies themselves hold potential secrets. The elaborate armor carved onto the marble knights is not merely decorative, it is often meticulously accurate, a detailed record of the evolution of military technology and the order's distinct styles over centuries. To a trained eye, the design of a gauntlet or the decoration on a breastplate could date a tomb with precision. Furthermore, some researchers suggest that the placement of certain symbols, the orientation of a sword, the specific flowers held in a stone hand, or the arrangement of heraldic elements might follow a coded language, a silent communication meant for fellow initiates. Could the choice of a 5-petaled lily instead of a rose indicate membership in a specific inner circle? Does a helm held beneath the head rather than at the feet signify a death in a particular battle or a special status within the order? We may never fully decrypt this stone language, but its consistent use suggests a layer of meaning beyond simple memorial. Perhaps the most poignant mystery of all is the fate of their very first necropolis, the original field of graves that surrounded their hospital in Jerusalem. Lost to centuries of conflict, urban development, and the shifting sands of time, its location is forgotten. How many of the founding brothers, the humble monks who started it all, lie there still? What simple markers might have once recorded their names and their acts of mercy? Their silent presence in that holy ground was the seed from which the entire mighty order grew, a reminder that before they were warriors entombed in marble, they were healers who believed that caring for the dead was the final, sacred act of caring for the faithful. Operating a sovereign state and a military empire stretched from Malta to Madrid required not just ships and soldiers, but a relentless flow of information. To coordinate the movements of their galleys, manage the vast finances of their European commanderies, and send sensitive intelligence about Ottoman plans, the Knights Hospitaller needed a communication system that was both efficient and utterly secure. In an age where letters could be intercepted by rival powers or inquisitive pirates, their entire operation depended on the ability to speak in a language that only they could understand. This necessity gave rise to a sophisticated culture of secrecy, one that likely employed everything from complex ciphers to seemingly innocent symbols carved in stone. While no definitive, complete cipher key from the order has survived the centuries, we can make educated guesses based on the practices of other powerful institutions of their time, like the Venetian Republic or the Vatican, both of which the Knights had extensive dealings with. One of the most probable methods was the use of a cipher disk, a brilliant and simple device consisting of 2 concentric wheels, each engraved with the letters of the alphabet. By turning the wheels to a prearranged alignment, a secret key known only to the sender and the recipient, a message could be transformed into gibberish. A word like galleys might become PDSSVZB with a single turn of the disk. For an order that prized standardization, each lang or regional division might have had its own unique cipher key, ensuring that a message captured from a French knight would be unreadable even if the Spanish branch's communications were compromised. Beyond simple letter substitution, they almost certainly used a system of code words and phrases to veil their most sensitive activities. In an intercepted letter, a seemingly mundane report about the arrival of 20 barrels of wine from our Apulian estate could have been a coded message announcing the successful rendezvous with 20 new recruits from Italy. A mention of poor harvests affecting the northern preceptories might secretly signal financial difficulties in their German holdings. This layer of linguistic deception turned their entire commercial and administrative correspondence into a potential vehicle for hidden meaning, allowing them to transmit vital information in plain sight under the guise of routine business. The most secure messages, however, were likely reserved for their most trusted couriers, men who were knights themselves and understood the mortal stakes of their mission. These carriers might have memorized the message verbatim, destroying any physical copy once it was committed to memory. For written orders, they could have employed the ancient method of the sightail, where a strip of parchment was wound around a rod of a specific thickness and the message written lengthwise. When unwound, the text would appear as a random jumble of letters. Only by wrapping it around an identical rod could the true message be read. This method, dating back to Sparta, would have been perfectly suited for a military order on the move, requiring no complex tools beyond a piece of wood carved to the exact specifications. But their secret language extended far beyond parchment and ink. It was etched into the very stones of their fortresses and woven into the art of their churches. The 8-pointed Maltese cross is the most obvious symbol, but its repetition across countless surfaces was more than just branding. For an initiate, the specific context of the cross could have conveyed meaning. A cross carved above a specific doorway in a commandery might indicate a safe room or a secret meeting place. A cross depicted with one point slightly longer than the others could have been a subtle signal, a signpost for those who knew how to look. Architectural elements also served as a silent code. The orientation of a vaulted ceiling, the number of steps in a secluded staircase, or the specific arrangement of tiles in a floor pattern could all have held significance. Some researchers point to the unusual geometric patterns found in certain auberges, the inns for the knights of each lang, suggesting they might reflect the sacred geometry each region held in particular esteem, a way of making a building feel like home to a brother from Provence or Aragon, while simultaneously encoding a message about the order's unified spiritual principles. Even their famed art, particularly the magnificent floor tombstones in St. John's Co-Cathedral, can be read as a complex symbolic language. The skulls and skeletons are classic memento mori, reminders of mortality, but the specific animals, flowers, and weapons depicted alongside a knight's coat of arms might tell a deeper story about his life, his deeds in battle, or even his membership in a specific inner circle within the order. A lion might represent courage, but a lion holding a specific banner could indicate participation in a particular campaign. This turning of art and architecture into a medium for hidden knowledge ensured that their most important spaces were not just functional or beautiful. They were living documents, a permanent and unbreakable cipher written in stone, waiting centuries for someone to learn how to read it. Amidst the clashing of swords and the thunder of cannon fire, one of the Knights Hospitaller's most enduring and life-saving legacies was born not on the battlefield, but in the silent, sterile halls of their hospitals. Their original sacred duty of healing never faded. Instead, it evolved into a sophisticated science that placed them centuries ahead of their time, particularly in their grim but brilliant mastery of one of history's greatest killers, the plague. Their greatest fortress against this invisible enemy was not made of stone, but of procedure and painful isolation, a system so effective it transformed their island home into both a sanctuary and a prison, known to terrified sailors throughout the Mediterranean as the Island of the Damned. When a wave of pestilence swept across the sea, the knights' response was swift, ruthless, and terrifyingly logical. Any ship wishing to enter the grand harbor of Malta was met not by port officials but by armed patrol boats. The crew and passengers were forced to halt, and a boarding party of knights, their faces covered with cloth masks and their hands protected by leather gloves, would climb aboard. They were not there to fight but to diagnose. Using long metal rods to maintain distance, they would examine those on deck, looking for the telltale signs, the swollen lymph nodes or buboes in the groin and armpits, the dark splotches on the skin, the feverish delirium. If there was any suspicion of disease, the ship was not turned away. Instead, it was directed to a specific, isolated inlet, often on the remote island of Manol or another designated quarantine location. There, the vessel and everyone on it were forced to anchor and wait. The length of this enforced isolation was not arbitrary. It was a calculated 40 days from the Italian term 40 giorni, which gives us our word quarantine. This period of 40 days was a stroke of epidemiological genius born from observation. The knights, through meticulous record-keeping at their infirmary, had likely deduced that if the plague did not manifest within that time frame, the ship could be considered safe to dock. For those trapped on board, it was a terrifying ordeal. They were prisoners of their own potential sickness, watching as supplies were rowed out to them by men who kept their distance, left to wonder if the fever would take them one by one. For the knights enforcing this, it was a grim but necessary duty. They understood that a single infected sailor could unleash hell upon the entire island, wiping out the population they were sworn to protect and crippling their military strength. Their system turned Malta into a sterile bubble in a septic world, a place where trade and life could cautiously continue while death raged elsewhere. At the heart of this defense was their crown jewel, the Sacra Infermeria in Valletta. To call it a hospital is to do it a disservice. It was a palace of healing, a vast, airy, and immaculate structure that could hold over 500 patients. Its great ward was a marvel of engineering, stretching nearly 500 feet long with a high, vaulted ceiling that allowed for constant circulation of fresh air, a stark contrast to the dark, cramped, and filthy infirmaries found in the rest of Europe. The beds were spaced apart, sheets were changed regularly, and the knights themselves, including high-ranking officials, took turns serving the sick, believing that tending to the ill was a sacred honor that mirrored Christ's service to humanity. But their advanced practices suggest a knowledge that went far beyond basic sanitation. Their medical prowess was legendary, and rumors swirled about the nature of their remedies. Where did this expertise come from? As an international order with outposts across Europe and constant contact with the Arab world, they had access to a vast pharmacopoeia of knowledge that was forbidden or simply unknown in the West. Their physicians, who were often knights themselves trained in the great universities of Italy and France, would have studied Arabic medical texts by scholars like Avicenna, which contained detailed understandings of anatomy, surgery, and contagious disease that were light years ahead of European humor theory. This exposure leads to the tantalizing question: did their medical knowledge include forbidden or lost ancient remedies? It is highly plausible that their libraries held copies of texts that would have been immediately condemned by the church pagan, works on herbalism, Arab texts on chemistry and distillation, or even fragments of pre-Christian healing rituals from the cultures they encountered. Their famed tiryaka, a complex medicinal concoction meant to serve as a universal antidote to poison and illness, was made from dozens of ingredients including opium, and its exact formula was a closely guarded secret. The methods for creating such complex medicines bordered on alchemy, requiring precise heating, distillation, and blending techniques. The most compelling evidence for their advanced understanding lies in their results. During severe outbreaks, the mortality rate within the Sacra Infermeria was astonishingly low for the period. They seemed to possess an almost intuitive grasp of germ theory long before it was scientifically formulated. Their strict isolation protocols, their obsession with cleanliness, and their use of early antiseptics like vinegar and wine to wash wounds and tools all point to a practical, hands-on understanding that disease could be transmitted by contact and air. They may not have known about bacteria, but they absolutely understood contagion. This combination of empirical observation and a willingness to incorporate knowledge from any source, regardless of its origin, made the Knights Hospitaller the most effective public health authority in the medieval and early modern world. Their medical legacy is a testament to the fact that their greatest weapon was not the sword but the scalpel, not the fortress wall but the quarantine flag. The final, desperate days of the Crusaders' stronghold at Acre in 1291 were not just a military catastrophe. They were a profound human tragedy and a cauldron of simmering rivalries that may have sealed its fate. For nearly 2 centuries, the city had stood as the crown jewel of the Crusader states, a bustling, cosmopolitan port where East met West. But by the spring of that year, it was a city under siege, surrounded by the overwhelming forces of the Mamluk Sultan al-Ashraf Khalil. Within its walls, the defense should have been unified, a last stand of Christendom. Instead, historical accounts suggest it was fractured by a bitter and ultimately fatal divide, particularly between the 2 most powerful military orders, the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller. The tension was not new. For decades, the two orders had jockeyed for influence, political power, and control of key fortresses. They were competitors for the same European donations and often advocated for starkly different military strategies. The Templars were frequently seen as more aggressive and inflexible, while the Hospitallers were often perceived as more pragmatic and diplomatic. In the pressure cooker of the Acre siege, these long-standing disagreements boiled over into what some chroniclers describe as outright hostility. They operated from separate, formidable headquarters, the Templar fortress at the seaward tip of the city and the Hospitaller compound in the northern suburb of Montmusard. Rather than presenting a united front, evidence suggests they sometimes planned operations independently, failed to coordinate reinforcements, and even accused each other of hoarding supplies and men. This lack of a single, coherent chain of command created critical weak points in the city's defenses that the savvy Mamluk commanders were all too ready to exploit. The most damning accusation revolves around a specific, pivotal event: the collapse of a key section of the northern wall known as the Accursed Tower. After weeks of relentless bombardment from massive siege engines, a gargantuan breach was finally opened. The Mamluks poured into the city, and the defense dissolved into street-by-street, house-by-house fighting. It was here that the blame game began. Some sources claim the Hospitallers, responsible for that sector, were overwhelmed and called for aid from the Templars, who were slow to respond, perhaps prioritizing the defense of their own quarter. Others whispered that the Templars, seeing the situation as hopeless, held back their forces for a last-ditch defense of their own fortress and the harbor, which offered the only possible escape route. In the chaos and terror of a city being overrun, the exact truth is impossible to ascertain, but the persistent stories of mutual recrimination point to a devastating failure of cooperation at the most crucial hour. Amidst the slaughter and the flames, a desperate evacuation began. The knights, understanding all was lost, fought a ferocious rearguard action toward the harbor, where a handful of ships waited. This frantic retreat was not just about saving lives, it was a race to preserve their very essence. Both orders had maintained their central treasuries and archives within their Acre headquarters for safekeeping. As Mamluk soldiers flooded the streets, small teams of knights would have been tasked with an impossible mission: to save what they could from the vaults before the enemy stormed the gates. The Templars are famously said to have loaded their entire treasury onto a single galley, which then mysteriously vanished from history. The Hospitallers, with their deep-rooted administrative culture, would have prioritized their records, the deeds to their vast European properties, financial ledgers, and perhaps their most sensitive intelligence on Mamluk operations. The question of what was left behind in those smoke-choked vaults is one of history's great losses. Their central hospitals and scriptoriums in Acre would have held the accumulated medical knowledge of 2 centuries in the East, including advanced surgical texts and herbal compendia borrowed from Arab physicians. Their chapels housed revered relics accumulated over generations, from fragments of the true cross to the bones of saints, all lost to the plunder. But the most intriguing losses are the hypothetical ones: the maps of trade routes and hidden harbors, the dossiers on local alliances and betrayals, and the private correspondence that might have revealed the true nature of their relationships with both their allies and their enemies. The physical fall of Acre was a disaster, but the incineration of its memory, the erasure of its records, was a tragedy from which our understanding of the Crusades has never fully recovered. The knights escaped with their lives and a fraction of their wealth, but they left a universe of secrets buried in the rubble, secrets that the conquering Mamluks likely had little interest in preserving. While their galleys patrolled the surface of the Mediterranean, the Knights Hospitaller operated another, far more subtle fleet, a silent armada of information that moved through ports, markets, and monasteries. This was the Order's true hidden weapon, a sophisticated intelligence apparatus that turned their entire international presence into a listening post. Every one of their commanderies, those seemingly placid monastic estates scattered across Europe, served a dual purpose. Yes, they were administrative centers managing vast agricultural lands and sending revenue back to Malta. But they were also nodes in a sprawling intelligence network, perfectly positioned to gather the whispers of kings, the gossip of merchants, and the movements of armies. Think of the strategic advantage this offered. A commandery in the south of France was not just collecting tithes from local farmers. The knight in charge was likely dining with the region's powerful nobility, hearing firsthand about tensions with Spain or the latest edict from Paris. Another preceptory in Sicily, a crucial crossroads between Europe and Africa, would have its finger on the pulse of all Mediterranean shipping, noting which Ottoman vessels were being outfitted for war and which Italian city-states were trading with the enemy. This decentralized system meant the Grand Master in Malta could receive a steady stream of verified reports from trusted sources, giving him a panoramic view of geopolitics that rivaled any monarch's privy council. The agents of this network were not professional spies in the modern sense. They were the brothers themselves. A Hospitaller knight was the ideal intelligence operative. His vows of poverty and obedience meant he had no personal financial ambitions or conflicting loyalties to a homeland. His religious habit granted him unparalleled access to all levels of society, from the peasantry to the papal court, and provided a perfect cover for travel. A knight journeying from one commandery to another was just a pious monk on order business, his saddlebags potentially carrying encrypted reports instead of prayer books. They also cultivated a vast network of informants, sailors they protected from pirates, merchants who benefited from their secure shipping lanes, and even converts from Islam who provided invaluable cultural and linguistic insights into the Ottoman world. The most critical front in this shadow war was without a doubt their original mission, the hospital. In an age where illness was a great equalizer, their infirmaries treated everyone regardless of faith or station. This created an unparalleled opportunity for intelligence gathering. An injured Ottoman sailor, grateful for the care he received and far from home, might let slip crucial details about fleet movements or the morale of the Sultan's troops to a seemingly sympathetic brother changing his bandages. A European merchant, feverish with malaria, could divulge the secret trade agreements he was brokering. The hospital was a place of lowered defenses, where secrets were as likely to spill out as a confession to a priest. The knights understood that compassion could be a sharper tool than any dagger for prying loose the truth. But how did they move this information across a hostile sea? Their own courier system, using fast, single-masted vessels that could outrun any Ottoman galley, was the most secure method. These ships carried the official correspondence, often written in complex ciphers that changed regularly. For even more sensitive messages, they employed steganography, hiding a message within an innocent-looking document. A lengthy report on the quality of the wine harvest in Cyprus could have a secret message written in lemon juice between the lines, visible only when heated over a candle. The true genius of their system was its resilience and deniability. If one commandery was compromised or a courier was captured, the rest of the network remained intact, its members unknown to each other. This web of whispers, woven from a unique blend of faith, business, and healing, gave the Knights Hospitaller an ability to see the future, allowing them to anticipate threats and seize opportunities in a way that made their small island fortress seem possessed of an almost supernatural foresight. This deep entanglement with the corridors of power, however, placed the English branch of the order, known as the Tongue of England, in an impossible position when King Henry VIII decided to break from the Church of Rome. The very faith that was the foundation of the Knights Hospitaller was suddenly deemed illegal in their own homeland. Henry's dissolution of the monasteries was a seismic event, a wholesale confiscation of church property designed to fill the royal coffers and break papal influence. For the Knights of St. John, whose vast English estates, manors, farms, churches, and hospitals were some of the most lucrative in all of Europe, this was an existential threat. They were caught in the ultimate contradiction, an international Catholic military order whose sovereign was now the head of a new Protestant church. Their loyalty to the Pope in Rome was now, by definition, an act of treason against the crown. In 1540, the inevitable hammer fell. Henry's government passed an act specifically for the suppression of the Hospitallers. Their Grand Priory at Clerkenwell, a sprawling complex that had been their English headquarters for centuries, was seized. Their lands were confiscated, their revenues diverted to the royal treasury. Officially, the Order of St. John in England was dissolved, its existence erased by royal decree, but something fascinating happened. Unlike the abrupt and violent end of the Templars, the English Hospitallers did not simply vanish. They entered a state of suspended animation, a peculiar legal and historical limbo. While the organization was dissolved, many of the individual knights, particularly those from powerful noble families, simply adapted. They swore the oath of supremacy, acknowledging Henry as the head of the church, and quietly blended back into the English aristocracy, taking their traditions and their private knowledge with them. This created a bizarre and unique schism within the global order. For the next 250 years, there were effectively two threads of the Knights Hospitaller. On the continent, the Catholic order continued its fight from Malta, still recognizing the Pope as its spiritual master. In England, there was no official order, but there remained a brotherhood in spirit, a secret society of men who still considered themselves knights, preserving their customs in private and waiting for a time when they might be restored. Their legacy was not maintained through fortresses or fleets, but through bloodlines and whispered traditions within certain aristocratic families. It was a ghost of an organization, invisible on paper but very much alive in memory. The most compelling mystery from this period revolves around the fate of the order's most sacred possessions in England. When the royal commissioners stormed the priory at Clerkenwell, what did they actually find? The official inventories list plate, jewels, and land deeds, the obvious wealth, but the knights would have had ample warning of the king's intentions. Is it possible they managed to hide their most treasured relics and their most sensitive archives before the seizure? Stories persist of secret tunnels beneath Clerkenwell, of valuables walled up in forgotten chambers, or of documents smuggled out to sympathetic Catholic estates in the countryside. The most tantalizing relic was the so-called Speaking Cross, a unique jeweled crucifix revered by the English knights. It simply disappears from all records after the dissolution. Was it melted down for its gold, or does it still exist, hidden away, a silent symbol of a faith that was forced underground? This period of suppression transformed the English Hospitallers from a public institution into a custodians of secrets, guarding not just objects, but their very identity for generations. The blow that finally shattered their island kingdom did not come from the Ottoman Empire they had fought for centuries, but from a new kind of conqueror. In 1798, Napoleon Bonaparte, en route to his campaign in Egypt, sailed into the grand harbor of Malta under the guise of needing to resupply his fleet. The knights, bound by their rules of neutrality and caught completely off guard by the sheer scale of the French Armada, allowed a handful of ships to enter at a time. It was a disastrous miscalculation. Once inside, Napoleon issued an ultimatum: surrender. The order, weakened by internal division and utterly unprepared for a fight against a modern European power, capitulated without a single cannon being fired. In a matter of days, the French expelled the knights from their home of 268 years. The sovereign state of the Knights of Malta was extinguished, its treasures plundered, and its brothers scattered to the winds, becoming refugees without a purpose. What followed was a long, desperate, and often humiliating struggle for mere existence. For decades, the order was a sovereign without territory, a nation without land, drifting through European courts seeking a new home and a renewed sense of identity. They found temporary refuge in Messina, then Catania, and later in Ferrara, their grandeur reduced to a peripatetic court in exile. The lowest point came in the 1830s when they were reduced to a single, crumbling building in Rome, the magistral palace on the Via Condotti granted to them by the Pope. Their military role was gone, their fleet was a memory, and their wealth was largely confiscated. They were a ghost of their former selves, seemingly destined to fade into a ceremonial footnote of history. Yet, the order possessed a remarkable resilience, a deep-rooted DNA of adaptation that had seen them through the fall of Acre and the loss of Rhodes. Their salvation lay in a return to their original founding principle, medical care and humanitarian aid. In the 19th century, they began to re-establish themselves not as warriors but as healers. They set up field hospitals and ambulance units, most notably during the Italian Wars of Unification, proving their relevance in a new era of conflict. This pragmatic pivot from crusaders to caregivers allowed them to slowly rebuild their reputation and their operational capacity, one act of mercy at a time. Their most astonishing modern achievement is their unique legal and diplomatic status. Today, the Sovereign Military Order of Malta is recognized under international law as a sovereign subject, despite having no territory beyond its two headquarters buildings in Rome. It maintains full diplomatic relations with over 110 countries, issues its own passports, stamps, and currency, and holds permanent observer status at the United Nations. This bizarre and fascinating situation stems from a centuries-old legal concept that sovereignty once held is not necessarily extinguished by the loss of territory. Their sovereignty is a functional one based on their long history and their ongoing humanitarian work around the globe. This unique status creates a complex and occasionally tense relationship with their oldest ally and protector, the Vatican. The order is a Catholic religious order, and its highest officers must swear oaths of obedience to the Pope. Yet it is also a sovereign entity, theoretically independent. This dual nature can lead to fascinating diplomatic dances. The order's internal governance, including the election of its prince and grand master, requires the approval of the Holy See. This intricate balance was tested dramatically in recent years when Pope Francis intervened to force the resignation of Grand Master Matthew Festing in 2017 over a governance dispute, a stark reminder of where ultimate authority can lie. The mysteries surrounding the modern order are less about hidden treasure and more about the nature of power and influence in the 21st century. What is the true purpose of maintaining such an elaborate diplomatic network? Is it a charming anachronism, or does it provide a unique, neutral channel for backdoor negotiations and humanitarian access in conflict zones that nation-states cannot easily reach? Their famous emergency medical and humanitarian missions, from providing aid in war-torn Ukraine to running refugee camps and fighting leprosy in Africa, are the public face of their work. But their quiet, sovereign status allows them to operate in places where politics often hinders larger organizations, acting as an agile and discreet force for good. The greatest enigma of the modern Knights of Malta is its enduring allure. It is a multinational force of 13,000 knights, dames, and volunteers, supported by over 100,000 medical staff and employees, all operating under the banner of an 800-year-old idea. They are a living paradox, a sovereign state without land, a religious order that negotiates with nations, and a medieval knightly brotherhood that deploys advanced field hospitals and disaster relief teams. They no longer guard forgotten relics in crypts, but they fiercely protect something perhaps more valuable: their sovereignty, their neutrality, and their unwavering commitment to their ancient motto, Tuitio Fide, et obsequium pauperum, defense of the faith and assistance to the poor. Their survival is their greatest mystery, a testament to the power of an idea that has proven itself more durable than any fortress wall. Amidst the golden crucifixes and jeweled chalices that filled their chapels, one sacred object stood above all others in the spiritual life of the Knights Hospitaller, the relic of the right hand of St. John the Baptist. This was not merely a holy artifact, it was the physical embodiment of their very identity, a tangible link to their patron saint and their founding mission of healing. The story of how this revered object came into their possession is a tale woven from devotion, desperation, and historical ambiguity. While tradition holds that the hand was discovered in Antioch during the 10th century and later gifted to the order, its documented history truly begins with their exile from the Holy Land. As the knights were forced to retreat from one stronghold to another, from Acre to Cyprus and then to Rhodes, they carried this sacred charge with them, protecting it with the same ferocity they would a sovereign or a strategic battle plan. Its arrival on Rhodes cemented its status as the palladium of the order, a divine safeguard for their new island home. When the knights were finally expelled from Rhodes by the Ottomans in 1522, the terms of their surrender, remarkably brokered by Sultan Suleiman himself, allowed them to leave with their arms, their standards, and their most sacred relics. There is little doubt the Baptist's hand was among these carefully guarded treasures. Its journey to Malta was fraught with peril, transported on a galley across a sea still controlled by their enemies, its safety paramount. Upon their arrival, the relic was installed with immense solemnity in the new conventual church in Birgu, and later, after the Great Siege, in the magnificent St. John's Co-Cathedral in Valletta. There, it was enshrined in an elaborate silver gilt reliquary, crafted in the form of a forearm and hand raised in a gesture of blessing, a constant visual reminder of the saint's presence and protection over the order. For centuries, its authenticity was a matter of faith, not science. The knights believed utterly in its power. Grand Masters would kiss the relic during their installation ceremonies, binding themselves to its spiritual authority. It was processed through the streets of Valletta during times of plague, drought, or impending attack, a call for divine intervention that the knights believed had saved them time and again, most notably during the Great Siege of 1565. Its presence was a cornerstone of their legitimacy, a symbol that God's favor rested upon their military and humanitarian endeavors. To question the relic was to question the very foundation of the order's divine right to rule and make war. The modern era, however, brought scrutiny. In the 1960s, the relic was subjected to a detailed scientific examination. The results were fascinating, if inconclusive. Radiocarbon dating of a fragment from the skin placed its origin somewhere between the 3rd and 1st centuries BC, a time frame that, while certainly ancient, does not align perfectly with the life of John the Baptist in the 1st century AD. This discrepancy is often explained by proponents as a result of contamination over centuries of handling and exposure to various elements like incense, smoke, and oils from the hands of the faithful. Furthermore, the examination confirmed the remains were those of a human male of Middle Eastern descent, and the morphology of the hand bones was consistent with a man of the Baptist's age. The science did not prove it was his hand, but it intriguingly did not rule it out either, leaving the door open to centuries of belief. This leaves us with a compelling historical puzzle. If it is not the actual hand of the Baptist, what profound meaning did it hold for the knights? Its value in many ways transcended its physical provenance. For a brotherhood of warrior monks, it was the ultimate symbol of their paradoxical nature. This was the hand that had baptized Christ, representing their sacred duty of healing and spiritual care. But it was also the hand that had pointed accusingly at King Herod, embodying the courage to confront temporal power and fight for their faith, a justification for their military crusades. It was a unifying focal point for an order drawn from across the fractious nations of Europe, a symbol that stood above regional loyalty. The true mystery may not be whether the bone and skin are genuine, but how a single object could crystallize the entire complex identity of a powerful and secretive order, providing a sacred anchor for their empire of faith, war, and healing. Walking through the fortified city of Valletta today, you are surrounded by more than just stone. You are moving through a vast three-dimensional cipher. The genius of the Knights Hospitalers architecture is immediately apparent in the sheer, awe-inspiring scale of the bastions and the calculated angles designed to deflect cannonballs. But a closer, more discerning look reveals a layer of intention that goes far beyond mere military engineering. The master builders of the order, men like the legendary Francesco Laparelli and his Maltese successor Girolamo Cassar, appear to have woven a hidden language of sacred geometry and celestial alignment into the very fabric of their stronghold, suggesting a spiritual and intellectual depth that has fascinated scholars for centuries. The most pervasive and powerful geometric principle found throughout their Maltese buildings is the application of the golden ratio, often represented by the Greek letter phi. This irrational number, approximately 1.618, appears repeatedly in nature, from the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower to the spiral of a nautilus shell, and has been used by artists and architects since antiquity to create compositions that are inherently pleasing to the human eye. In Valletta, this ratio is not a coincidence, it is a deliberate design feature. The proportions of the Grand Master's palace, the dimensions of the main thoroughfares, and even the layout of the Sacra Infirmaria's iconic Great Ward all conform to harmonic ratios based on phi. This creates a sense of subliminal order and balance, a visual representation of the harmony the Knights sought to impose upon a chaotic world, reflecting a belief that their city was a divine project built according to cosmic principles. This celestial connection extends beyond abstract ratios to direct astronomical alignment. The orientation of St. John's Co-Cathedral, the spiritual heart of the order on Malta, is particularly telling. While many Christian churches are traditionally aligned on an east-west axis, with the altar in the east facing the rising sun, a symbol of Christ's resurrection, the Co-Cathedral's alignment is slightly off this axis. Some researchers propose this deviation was intentional, allowing for specific shafts of light to illuminate particular altars or artworks on significant liturgical feast days, such as the summer solstice or the feast of Saint John the Baptist himself. This practice of architectural astronomy would have required sophisticated knowledge of solar cycles and a desire to literally bring the heavens down to earth, transforming the church into a giant stone calendar that marked sacred time through the interplay of light and shadow. The design of the Knights' unique living quarters, known as auberges, further hints at a coded architectural language. Each of these inns was built for one of the 8 langs, or regional divisions, of the order. While they share a common stylistic vernacular of Mannerist strength and elegance, each auberge also incorporates subtle symbolic elements specific to its lang. The Auberge de Castile, for the Knights from Spain and Portugal, features robust, almost severe facades that project martial power. In contrast, the Auberge d'Italy displays a more pronounced Renaissance elegance. Beyond these stylistic nods, the very floor plans and interior courtyards of these buildings often incorporate the 8-pointed Maltese cross into their layout, not just as a decorative motif but as an integral structural element. The number 8 itself, representing the langs, is recurrent in window groupings, vaulting sections, and courtyard arches, a constant, silent reinforcement of the order's unified structure. Perhaps the most enigmatic architectural features are the ones we can no longer easily see: the rumored network of hidden passages and chambers that lace the bedrock beneath Valletta and its key fortifications like Fort St. Angelo. While many tunnels served confirmed strategic purposes, such as sally ports for surprise attacks or secure communication routes between bastions, others defy simple explanation. Persistent legends speak of a submerged tunnel running beneath the Grand Harbor, an incredible feat of engineering that would have allowed for the covert movement of men and supplies even during a total naval blockade. Other tales describe sealed chambers within the fort's deepest foundations, rooms designed not for storage but for secret meetings or to house archives too sensitive to be kept anywhere else. The sheer ambition of these rumored projects aligns with the Knights' character. They were masters of operating on multiple levels, always ensuring they had a final, unseen card to play. So were the Knights Hospitaller, embedding esoteric secrets into their architecture. The most compelling conclusion is that their buildings served a glorious dual purpose. The fortifications were unquestionably functional, a masterclass in defensive design meant to withstand the most powerful armies of the age. Yet, for the initiated brother, they were also a spiritual landscape. The harmonious ratios, the celestial alignments, and the recurring symbolic numbers were a continuous, silent sermon in stone. They reinforced core beliefs, offered divine protection through sacred proportion, and created an environment where faith, science, and warfare were not in conflict, but in perfect intentional alignment. The walls were their shield, but the hidden geometry encoded within them was the unmistakable signature of their soul. Even their most honored leaders, the Grand Masters who guided their destiny, are shrouded in one final, compelling mystery that lies not in how they lived, but in where they were laid to rest. While the magnificent floor of St. John's Co-Cathedral serves as a public record of marble and brass for many high-ranking knights, the complete story of the Grand Master's burials is punctuated with puzzling gaps and whispered rumors. The official narrative suggests a seamless procession of leaders, each receiving a state funeral and a tomb befitting their station. Yet historical records reveal inconsistencies that hint at secrets buried with them. The most prominent example is the Order's greatest hero, Grand Master Jean Parisot de Valette. After his death in 1568, just 3 years after his legendary defense of Malta, he was given the unprecedented honor of being interred within the crypt of the original conventual church, a site that now lies somewhere beneath the cathedral's later expansions. A magnificent monument commemorates him, but the precise location of his physical remains is unknown. Some historians and local lore suggest he was placed in a sealed, hidden chamber, a secret known only to his immediate successors to protect his grave from potential desecration by future enemies, turning his tomb into the first piece of a much larger puzzle. This practice of discreet burial may extend beyond Valette to other leaders who died under controversial or politically turbulent circumstances. Consider the fate of a Grand Master like Fawkes de Villeret, who was deposed in a violent coup on Rhodes. The historical accounts of his final years are conflicting and vague. One source claims a peaceful retirement, while others hint at assassination. If his end was indeed untimely and shameful for the Order, would they have risked interring him in a grand public tomb that could become a rallying point for dissent or a permanent reminder of their internal strife? It is far more plausible that he, and others like him, were laid to rest in an unmarked grave within a secluded monastery or a remote commandery, their final resting place intentionally erased from the official history to maintain a facade of unity and strength. The Order was meticulous in controlling its public image, and a dishonorable end for a Grand Master was a vulnerability that needed to be concealed, not commemorated. The most tantalizing speculation, however, involves not just the men, but the knowledge they may have taken with them. These were not just spiritual leaders, they were the CEOs of a sovereign state, privy to its deepest secrets, the location of hidden treasury reserves, the identities of their most valuable spies within the Ottoman court, or the whereabouts of documents too sensitive to be kept in any archive. The notion that a dying Grand Master might be buried with a crucial item, a single key, an encrypted map, or a small, vital codebook, is not as far-fetched as it sounds. This would have been the ultimate form of information security, a secret that died with him, only to be passed on verbally to his vetted successor under oath. The contents of such a grave would be of incalculable historical value, a literal vault of lost intelligence. The question then becomes, if such burials occurred, how would we ever find them? The clues would not be in public records, but perhaps in the private diaries of their confessors or in the architectural quirks of the chapels they frequented, a silent code waiting for the right key. The quest to unravel the secrets of the Knights Hospitaller is far from over. It has simply traded the lanterns of medieval scribes for the glowing screens of modern technology. Today, a new generation of historians, archaeologists, and dedicated independents is applying cutting-edge tools to these age-old puzzles, not with shovels and speculation alone, but with satellite imagery, spectral analysis, and supercomputers. This isn't about dusty textbooks anymore. It's a high-tech treasure hunt for truth, breathing new life into cold cases centuries old. One of the most exciting frontiers is the non-invasive exploration of known hospitaller sites. Across Malta, Rhodes, and their former European commanderies, teams are using ground-penetrating radar and LiDAR technology to see through stone and earth without ever breaking ground. These tools are like X-ray vision for archaeologists, mapping anomalies hidden beneath fortress courtyards and cathedral floors. The goal is to finally confirm the existence of those legendary hidden tunnels and chambers whispered about for so long. Are there sealed rooms beneath Fort St. Angelo holding forgotten archives? Does a subterranean passage indeed run beneath the Grand Harbor? These technologies are providing the first tantalizing clues, revealing voids and structural anomalies that perfectly align with the oldest legends, offering a scientific roadmap for future, carefully targeted excavation. Simultaneously, the immense task of digitizing the Order's surviving archives is creating a different kind of map, a digital web of connections that was impossible to see before. Thousands of fragile documents, from financial ledgers and ship manifests to personal letters, are being meticulously scanned and transcribed. Once these texts are digitized, researchers can use powerful software to perform pattern analysis across this vast dataset. This process can suddenly reveal hidden links, like tracking the mysterious disappearance of a specific ship from the logs after a certain date, or cross-referencing a sudden, unexplained expenditure with a rumored clandestine operation. A name mentioned in a letter from a commandery in France might suddenly appear in a hospital log in Jerusalem years later, piecing together the movement of people and ideas within the Order's secretive network. This digitization is also unlocking the secrets within the documents themselves through multispectral imaging. Many parchments are palimpsest pages where the original text was scraped off and written over due to the extreme cost of vellum. Earlier scholars could only guess at what was lost. Now, by scanning manuscripts at different light wavelengths, researchers can often recover the erased text underneath. A mundane inventory list from 15th century Rhodes might, beneath the surface, reveal a fragment of a much older medical text or a navigational chart, a ghost from the Order's past suddenly brought back to light. This technology offers the faint hope that some knowledge from the lost great archives of Rhodes might yet be recovered from the bindings and reused pages of later books. The most captivating modern investigations, however, focus on the Order's most tangible remains, their sunken ships. Maritime archaeologists are now focusing on pinpointing the wreckages of specific hospitaller vessels, like the lost flagship San Giovanni or the treasure-carrying Santa Anna. Using advanced side-scan sonar and remotely operated vehicles (ROV), they are systematically scouring the Mediterranean seafloor, particularly around Malta and the routes to Rhodes. Finding a knightly galley is the ultimate prize, a time capsule sealed in deep water. Such a wreck would not just hold potential gold, it could preserve the most ephemeral and precious thing of all, information. The waterlogged remains of a captain's logbook, the unique design of the ship's rudder, or the personal effects of a high-ranking officer could provide irrefutable answers about their naval technology, their secret trade routes, and the final moments of lost voyages. Perhaps the most profound, unanswered question remains the fate of their founding spiritual charge, the relic of the hand of St. John the Baptist. While science has dated the skin, the mystery of its journey before it reached the Knights is a focus of ongoing historical genealogical research. Scholars are delving deeper into Byzantine and Armenian chronicles, trying to trace the relic's path from the east to its appearance in the Order's possession. Each new fragment of text that surfaces adds another piece to this 1,200-year-old puzzle. The work of these modern investigators ensures the story of the Knights Hospitaller is still being written. Every radar ping echoing under Valletta, every digitized line of a medieval ledger, and every sonar scan of a dark seabed is a new sentence in their epic. They are driven by the conviction that the Order's greatest secret is still out there, waiting to be found, not with a key to a buried chest, but with the right combination of technology, patience, and an unwavering respect for the shadows of the past. Their story is far more than a chronicle of battles won and lost. It is the enduring allure of a paradox made real. The Knights Hospitaller captivate us because they were a living contradiction, a seamless fusion of three seemingly incompatible identities: the pious monk, the compassionate medic, and the ruthless warrior. They built empires of healing and fortresses of faith, all while navigating the shadowy realms of politics and power with a cunning that has left historians piecing together a puzzle with half the pieces missing. This unique blend is why their legend refuses to fade. We are drawn to the mystery of what they truly knew, what they secretly guarded, and how they managed to survive against impossible odds time and time again. Their legacy is a tapestry woven with threads of lost knowledge and vanished treasures. We wonder about the contents of the great archives of Rhodes, incalculable wisdom, perhaps lost to Ottoman looting or simply scattered to the winds. We speculate about the fate of sacred relics like the Hand of St. John. Its authenticity, a question faith must answer where science can only suggest. We are tantalized by legends of ghost fleets and sunken galleys, their holds potentially carrying not just gold but secrets that died with their crews. And we are left with the architectural whispers of Malta and Rhodes, where fortifications seem to hold coded messages in their stonework, and hidden chambers promise answers just out of reach. This is not just history, it is a grand, centuries-old detective story. Ultimately, their greatest miracle might be their resilience. They adapted, they evolved, and they endured long after the world that created them had vanished. From the dusty roads of Jerusalem to the sun-baked rocks of Malta, and finally into the modern era as a unique sovereign entity dedicated to global charity, they have continually rewritten their own purpose. They prove that the most powerful force is not a sword or a secret, but an idea of service, sacrifice, and an unbreakable will to persist. That is the true treasure of the Knights Hospitaller, and it is one that can never be lost to the sea or locked away in a vault. But the investigation is never truly over. History is a conversation, and we want to hear your voice. What is your favorite Hospitaller mystery? Do you believe they inherited secrets from the Templars, or do you think their real power was simply superior organization? Perhaps you have a theory about the lost Maltese falcon or the location of a hidden tunnel beneath Valletta. Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Let's keep the quest for knowledge alive. And if you've enjoyed this journey into the heart of one of history's most enigmatic brotherhoods, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the mysteries of our past.